Right, greetings. Hello, welcome to the Philosophy Club here in La Creuse. And it's been quite an eventful week. I'll just start, as I normally do, with a little roundup of, world events and what's been going on here in the Museum of the Muses in the middle of France. So today is the 25th of February, Sunday, so several things have been going on this week. I want to first mention the interview that Putin gave to Tucker Carlson, which has had 2.75 million views so far. He recorded it in the Kremlin, and that's quite an important event. I've listened to the whole thing. I've been to the Kremlin, and I was elected coordinator of Philosophers for Peace in Moscow, not far from the Kremlin, at a conference in 1990, when Putin was driving a taxi in St. Petersburg. Putin comes across, it's a masterly interview, I would say, from his perspective. He comes across as intelligent, well-informed, well-briefed, knowledgeable, humorous, a master on the top of his game. But Tucker Carlson, I think, let him off the hook far too easily. He didn't ask many of the most important questions that should have been asked. He didn't ask about the opposition, the silencing of the opposition in Russia. He didn't ask, what do you think about democracy, Mr. Putin? What do you think about the death of Navalny? Did you order the killing? He didn't ask about the war in Gaza. What do you think of wars, Mr. Putin? He didn't ask about the suffering of the Palestinian people and the Israelis and that madness. What are you doing as Russian president to try and end that war, Mr. Putin? What's your views on wars? He didn't ask Putin to describe what he thinks, why peace is preferable to war. All these questions I would have asked him as president of Philosophers for Peace had I got the chance to sit where Tucker Carlson was. And I think that he did ask one question right at the end, what about this American chap you've arrested, a journalist, you've accused him of espionage, he's languishing in a jail, can you let him free? Can he come home with our crew? That was a good question, well done Tucker, and of course the President sort of didn't say either way anything useful. He just said, well, people are talking about this. He also said a couple of times, why don't you just ring up Joe Biden and try and end this war? Why don't you do direct diplomacy? And Putin's line was, well, he can ring me anytime. It's like arrogance. I'm not going to ring him. I'm president of, Russia. So what, if I'd have been Tucker Carlson, I would have said, got a phone anywhere? I would have rung Biden there and then on camera and passed him the phone. That's logical. We've got to get these two people talking. There's obviously a huge amount of bad blood. The other thing Putin did was he justified his invasion on February the 24th, 2022, exactly 2 years ago, by saying, well, we didn't start this war. The Ukrainians had already started it by XYZ. We just went in to try and finish it. We were trying to bring peace back. It was them attacked us first. Now, historically, that can all be challenged and is inaccurate and, is not a justifiable excuse under international law for invading Ukraine. But Tucker Carlson just let it go, no, fine, let's move on. And the other thing I found slightly sinister is that Carlson was constantly smiling at Putin, and Putin was smiling back. There's an awful lot of grinning going on. 300,000 people of the Russians have died in this war, soldiers, conscripts, people that are forced to go and fight, cannon fodder. Did he ask him, and what do you think about the 300,000 Russian soldiers who died in this war, Mr. Putin? Do you think it was worth it? No, not a mention. Maybe it would have wiped the grins off their faces. And what about all the innocent Ukrainians that his missiles have bombed in apartment buildings, including Holocaust survivors that survived them and fought with the USSR against the Nazis, only to die at the hands of Putin's missiles in Kyiv? Any remorse about that, Mr. Putin? No, not a single mention. He let him ramble on for over 40 minutes about Russian history, according to Putin's semi-educated mind, in which he tried to write Ukraine out of history as if it doesn't exist. And only Russia is the great power. But Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, was a great city of culture and learning and Christianity, when Moscow was just a few huts. I mean, Moscow is the newcomer here. All that airbrushed out of history. It was a puerile attempt by Putin to justify his actions. And because Carlson wasn't well informed enough or well briefed enough, or because he deliberately was providing Putin with a platform to spout his propaganda, he let him get away with it. And many of the questions were sort of geared towards Trump, the Trump wing of American politics. It's like, are you looking forward to a new president? Kind of stuff. Not in so many words, but if you read between the lines, it's obvious that Carlson is a real Trump supporter and can't wait to get rid of Biden and stab him in the back with a knife. So anyway, I'd give them about 2 out of 10 for the performance. It was very atmospheric and well lit. So the context was brilliant, better lit than my place. Better designs and all that. But when it comes to truth, I think one form of lying is avoiding, confronting difficult issues, avoiding questions that are difficult but need to be asked. He asked him about, Carlson got one question and he said, tell me about faith. And I understand you're an Orthodox Christian, so what does that mean to you? How can you square that with being the leader of a nation state? Who has to sometimes kill? Interesting question. But he didn't sort of probe enough into that. He didn't get to Putin's idea of theology. Basically Putin said, I'm just a Christian inch deep. Really, I'm just a Machiavellian. I'll do or say what's needed to advance the cause of the power of the Russian people. Which is, can be challenged on theological grounds. But Carlson obviously didn't have the intelligence to do that. And the final point was Putin's basic argument is that there is no such thing as Ukraine. There's only Greater Russia, which is entitled to control Ukraine. And the Ukrainian soul and the Russian soul are therefore one, and therefore they have no right to feel different or exist as a different culture or nation. Well, that's a spurious argument in international law. It's like the United Kingdom declaring war on Ireland and re-invading and conquering them because they speak English, and therefore we're entitled to control their territory politically, and rubbing out the whole history of Irish independence movements, the Irish struggle for independence over hundreds of years, which has also been there in Ukraine. Anyway, interesting. So I would say do your homework. Don't be led astray by the glamour, the glitz, the kind of, the presentation of that interview. Probe down into it. And I think, obviously, I would love it if Putin would talk to Biden. He said, no, they're welcome to ring me anytime. Look, Mr. Putin, you're welcome to ring me anytime. We can chat about philosophy. We can talk about where were you in 1990 when I was elected Philosophers for Peace coordinator, and what have you been doing for peace since then? Because I still maintain Russia could and should be doing much more for peace. If there was a morally intelligent president who wouldn't be silencing the opposition, wouldn't be killing off dissidents, wouldn't be poisoning people, would be allowing a free press, would be allowing journalists to accurately report events and affairs, and would not be invading neighbouring countries or threatening to invade them, then Russia could be a truly great power. You see, I believe great powers are great because they're morally great first, not because they have superpower weapons. It's in morality that true superpower status exists, I think. And so anyway, it's worth watching, is all I can say. I've also been involved this week in giving a talk to the American peace movement, the American Alliance for Peace, which was founded by Marianne Williamson, a great American activist, a peace thinker, a spiritual leader, and she stood for presidency of the States a couple of times. She's had many, many people supporting her, and I don't know if she's standing again this time, but she certainly, is a woman of great integrity. She founded this thing, the Peace Alliance, some years ago, and they're campaigning for a Department of Peace, or peace building, to be established under American law on an equal footing to the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, which has a vast budget, and it has this huge building called the Pentagon. They want one that will work for peace building, will work for mediation, resolving conflict. If we'd have had a Department of Peace building in the States, I don't think this Ukraine-Russia war would have happened, because its job would have been to prevent it when it saw it coming. I saw this war coming way back in 2008 when I visited the Balkans. I could read the runes and see there was trouble, because Russia was threatening to cut off Ukraine's gas at that point. And I realised, oh God, trouble brewing. I actually proposed we have a European Union mediation service officially as part of the European Union to deal with those kind of things. I still think we should have one. But anyway, in America, I support this initiative for a Department of Peace building, and I gave a talk at 2 a.m. in the morning, my time, to this very interesting group of peace activists and thinkers. And I told them about my nonagon project. A nonagon is a 9-sided figure. Pentagon is a 5-sided figure. The nonagon, as I designed it, is a 9-sided building that would house the Department of Peace for the US government. But I think strategically it should be located on the top floor of the Pentagon by building a building on the roof, because the Pentagon is it's not very tall. It's quite shallow, and easily there's room to build the top floor. And it could be done largely with glass, like futuristic architecture, a beautiful building with sort of rainbow colours and fountains and a peace garden on the top of the roof. And it would house the work of the Department of Peace, which would be doing mediation, conflict resolution, peace development and so on, throughout the States and internationally. And it would have a budget as big as the Pentagon. So, anyway, I gave a talk about that, which hopefully people can watch. It was good. And then the other thing I've done is attend a conference yesterday about the tragedy of the Gaza war and what we can do about that, and also a conference about the tragedy of Ukraine. So I've been busy I feel like a firefighter trying to pour water on these conflicts. And water is the symbol of the Delphic Games, of course, which I'm the educational coordinator for. And I think that we need water to come and put out these people's emotions are very high at the moment in Israel and Palestine and in Ukraine and Russia. People feel passionately about this, and they're right and the other guys are wrong, and it's like fire. And it's my daughter that says you can't fight fire with fire, you can only fight it with water. So we have to pour on this huge fiery anger that's built up, and pain and suffering. The lysis energy, which is the Greek word for enlightenment. In the philosophical tradition of Pythagoras and Plato, enlightenment is called lysis, which means releasing and liquefying. And it's the root of the chemical analysis word. And to analyse something is to reduce it to its components in chemistry, but also in philosophy. So analytical philosophy, which I practice as well, is to analyse concepts and ideas back to their minute particles and then resolve them, dissolve them, And lysis is also has the meaning of setting free. It's pronounced lysis in Greek. Lysis is a setting free of the knot of turmoil that causes the problem. So philosophers, we love to tackle problems and resolve them. Well, we apply lysis energy, which is to liquefy it, because we all swim in the same ocean. We're all like dolphins swimming in the same ocean, if you want to use the Apollo imagery of the Delphi Foundation, because it was dolphins swimming there that founded the Delphic site, which I've been to and greatly love. It's called the navel of the world. It was always regarded as the mother goddess navel of the world. And so, let's get some more lysis on these conflicts. Okay, so that's my introduction to the Philosophy Club. That's why we're here doing what we do. So let's start with a periodic table, I think. Choose one each. And can I have one of those two? And then we'll see what comes up. Because the periodic table of the religions and philosophies, this is the map or chart of all the possible sort of ideologies and philosophical traditions that are at war on the planet. And if we can analyse them all, we can apply the energy of lysis to solving the conflicts that are going on between them. That's the theory. Okay.
As nowadays, economic seems to have to be important factor as a conflict.
Yes.
We speak about economic war.
Sure.
So could you maybe tell us about philosophy and economism?
Right, 163.
Yes.
Okay, fine. That's definitely, we'll do that one. Yeah. Maybe choose another philosophy one. Well, it's up to you, Sophie. Whichever you're drawn to.
Should I do it from higher self instead?
Sure, you can do that. Yeah.
Okay. Santeria,
Okay.
103.
Sure. That's a new religious movement.
Right.
Yeah. That's fine. Right. So let's start with the economism one. 163. So economics is a Greek word meaning the affairs of the household, the ecos, which gives us also the word ecology, and ecumenical and so on. The ecos is the affairs of the household, and it meant how you regulate those affairs, the economy of the household. And then I think it was Aristotle that first suggested that we have, a sort of a rational, ordered discussion about economics, but he never followed up on it in great detail. It was left till later, and the first, classical economics developed in the 18th century here in France, with the work of a man called Quesnay, Q-U-E-S-N-A-Y, a French physiocrat, who, he was a very interesting man. He was a Freemason, a member of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, with Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. And he believed that economics could be subject to rational discussion. And he developed a series of tables, a tableau, that explained how you can balance, what is the economic wealth of a given nation? Where does it come from? How can it be increased? He argued, as a physiocrat, that all wealth comes from nature, hence physiocrat. So nature is the source of wealth, as in raw materials, like wood for timber, stone for buildings, etc., etc. Animals for food and milk and so on, and plants for eating. And so nature is the source of wealth, he said. Therefore, we have to regulate and share out access to the wealth of nature in a rational way. It's not right that somebody has access to, 1,000 acres of land and all it produces, and somebody else only has 1 or 2 acres. There should be a kind of rational distribution. These ideas fed into the current which became the revolutionary Enlightenment in France. And Rousseau picked up on them to some extent with his idea of the importance of nature, living in harmony with nature, that nature represents the original purity that we've fallen from. Anyway, I think physiocracy is interesting and it fits in with some ideas of green economics. Economics has come a big journey since then, but in the works of E.F. Schumacher and green economists, we've got back to this idea that nature is the source of wealth. Therefore, we shouldn't pollute nature. We shouldn't overfish. We shouldn't overuse the resources. We have to manage carefully nature so that not just us, but future generations for a million years can benefit. We have to live in harmony with ecology. And so I think if we look back at the history of economics, that physiocratic foundation of the discipline is very interesting. I'm a green thinker myself as a philosopher. And so, but since before then, we had 2 main schools. Classical economics, associated with Adam Smith in Britain, argued that wealth comes from trade and human intercourse, and that trade is a very good thing. And he wrote this famous book, Wealth of Nations. The more we trade, the more we can advance the wealth of our nation. We can then go and trade with others, they can trade with us. And this leads to an all-round, beneficial outcome. The work is interesting, The Wealth of Nations. He was a proper intellectual in the Scottish Enlightenment. He was a professor at Glasgow before he went to Oxford. He gave these lectures originally at Oxford. In there, he's aware of the importance of religion even for economics. He talks about, for instance, in India, the role of the temples in the economy of the local community. In India, a lot of economic activity takes place in and around the temple. And a lot of traders, they have stalls, merchandise outside. And so for him, religion is an economic good. It's beneficial to the community. It enhances the social solidarity of the community. And the same he talks about in ancient Rome or Greece, where the temple was very important. And in fact, economic historians have discovered that money was first coined in the temples of ancient Greece. And it was stamped with the name or the image of the god or goddess of the temple. The economic historians have dug up really ancient coins from the 8th century BC in Lydia, which is part of Asia Minor, Turkey, and the idea spread to Greece, Greek islands, and then it spread to Athens, and modern money took off, coinage, and it spread to Rome. And the word money we use comes from the temple of Juno Monitas, where the coins were made in ancient Rome. Juno was the wife of Jupiter, the king of heaven. She was the queen of heaven, and she was in charge of all money and coins. So there is a link between religion, spirituality, and economics, which Adam Smith knows about. He has this idea of the invisible hand. He didn't think governments should play a huge role. They should just sort of sit back and let people sort out affairs, and the invisible hand will take care of it. It's slightly naive, I think, with hindsight, and a bit optimistic, because the invisible hand can turn into a poisoner in the hands of people like Putin or Hitler or Genghis Khan. And they, individuals will accumulate huge amounts of ill-gotten wealth, which is what Putin has done. By the way, Carlson didn't ask him, about his money hidden offshore and what he's done with the plunder he's stolen from the Russian people. Didn't ask about that. But Navalny, who's just been murdered in prison, made a film about Putin's palace with ridiculous opulence like gold toilets and stuff on the coast of the Black Sea. Navalny organised a drone to fly over it, and he released a video film which is on the internet about this. And that's why Putin wanted him killed, because Navalny was exploring Putin's misuse of wealth. And there is a link between dictatorship and mass accumulation of wealth. Hitler did the same around Europe. He plundered the wealth of Europe and used it for Nazi coffers. All dictators do the same. So we had classical economics, Adam Smith and many others like Ricardo and so on. Then along came socialist economics in the person of mainly Marx and Engels, but there were others as well, important thinkers, who critiqued classical economics and said we should have wealth shared among everybody because we all create it together. And this was Marx's theory of the labour theory of value. So wealth is created by our labour. If you work, 10 hours a day doing up your place, your labour is imprinted into it, and so it sort of belongs to you. And it's not right if somebody else comes along and appropriates it. And that can apply to intellectual property or physical property. I think in my study of Marxism, I've done a commentary on Marx's Das Kapital, which is available on my Green University website. So I think Marx was a genius and a polymath and a very clever chap, and his critique of capitalism is about 80% accurate. But unfortunately, I think he made a fatal error by missing out Hegel's understanding of the role of spirituality in the forming of the dialectic behind history. Marx wants to introduce a rigorous materialism in his methodology. I think that was an intellectual mistake, and the world has paid a heavy price for that, because if you have only materialism, there's no place ethics can get into the system. And that's what happened with extreme Marxist, pseudo-Marxists, I would say, like Stalin and Mao, who misused Marx's brilliant ideas to then impose a totalitarian control over society, which didn't work. So where are we? When I went to Moscow in 1990 and again in 93, I spoke to philosophers there who were in touch with the Green movement. One of the intellectuals I met was friends with a chap who'd written a book called The Destruction of Nature in the Soviet Union. Under communism, it's supposed to work out brilliantly, but they were also plundering nature. They had the Chernobyl disaster, and then they had absolute destruction of the Aral Sea. So the communist system in Russia, or the Soviet Union, was not sensitive to nature. It had forgotten the lesson of the physiocrats. And, with tragic consequences. I mean, even now in parts of Central Asia, babies are being born deformed because of the fallout from all the nuclear testing the USSR used to do. So this is where green economics comes in. And I think if you click on the box on economic thought, all this comes up. And I think we need to rethink economics so that we all have enough, that the social experience of living a human life is a pleasant one and not fraught with anxiety and danger and fear, and also that we don't damage nature and ruin the environment for future generations. So economists have got a lot of work to do, and it's very important that they do it. Okay, so that's that one. Santeria is an interesting tradition. It's a new religious movement associated with teachings brought to the Caribbean and Latin America, largely from the slave community, a black African community that were transported there to Brazil and elsewhere. And they brought a pantheon of deities with them from Africa, and it's blended and merged with the native American Indian traditions of places like Brazil, and it's produced a great synthesis of these different traditions. Is my periodic table book available? Can you see it? Is it behind you somewhere? Because there's more detail anyway in that book. And again, if you're interested in the details, click on the button, on the table. these kind of religions, these new religious movements, also have an economic role to play in their societies. They act as a meeting place for the worshippers. They come together in a spirit of solidarity. These new religious movements sometimes use various forms of psychedelics, like ayahuasca and things, to increase that sense of togetherness. And they use prayer and ritual and dance and ceremony to, to foster a sense of well-being in the community, which, as Adam Smith said, plays an important role in creating peace. So I think that they're connected, these two, in a strange way. The Santeria tradition is not big. I mean, it's 100,000 maybe, but it's important to its followers. And like all these traditions, like Druidry or Wicca or whatever, it has a small but devoted following. And they're all interconnected at a higher level, I would say. But do look up the details if you're interested on the website or in the book. Okay, let's move on now and do one of the tarot of the gods, okay? And see what's happening in the theological world of the gods. Here, ladies first, have a shuffle. And we'll have a card we haven't done before, if that's okay.
Oops. Oh gosh.
Okay, well that's a good one. Let's have that one.
E.T.
Brahma,
came through this morning.
right.
I cannot read that. King of Earth. Da.
Ah,
Wonderful.
oh wow, okay. That's good. Da. An African deity, a snake deity. I just want to say I've found more detail on the Santeria tradition.
Oh, beautiful.
So it's also called candomblé, and it was indeed taken from Africa, as I said, by slaves, mostly from the Lukumi people, Yoruba of Nigeria. And what's interesting is scholars have discovered that Santeria very much carries the same pantheon of deities that are still worshipped back in Nigeria. They're called the Orishas, spiritual deities and ancestor spirits, and one of them is Oshun,
Yes.
Ogun, Orula, Eshu, Chango. They have temples and sacred altars, and so they've spread through that, they've spread to Uruguay, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, Mexico, and nowadays even in Germany, Italy, Portugal and Spain. So candomblé or Santeria is now a worldwide thing, if you want. It's in Salvador, Brazil, and from there it moved across Latin America. So there are writings about it, hymns, chants and prayers, but it's mostly a living oral tradition. And it's a primal African religious belief, polytheism. They also use trance mediums, who are priests and priestesses, and they believe the earth is surrounded